Hello, good morning. This is Ashish. I welcome you to the second webinar of series of webinars that we are hosting on our work focused on sustainable mobility and built environment in smart cities. Yesterday, we had a very interesting discussion on parking management in smart cities, and today's presentation is focused on electrification of IPT in smart cities. Uh, Presentation is based on actions initiated in 4 smart cities that we've been engaged in. And the format of the discussion today is that we share these slides as a presentation. And we are joined by two representatives from the expert side. We have Professor Sanjay Gupta, Head Transport Planning Department, School of Planning and Architecture, Delhi. And we have Vivek Chandran, who represents Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation, which is also the foundation that has helped further this work in the cities we've been working. So I go ahead and share the slides with you. In the webinar, there's an option of raising questions, and I encourage you to share any questions that you might have. We would be raising the questions to the expert as well for their responses. So we all know about the Smart Cities mission. This is a mission that is operated by the current government as a centrally sponsored scheme. It's focusing on inclusive and sustainable development in compact cities, creating a replicable model for other cities, and is the provision of efficient mobility, sustainable housing, and sustainable environment are part of the core infrastructure elements in the mission. What we notice as the list of projects that have been approved in Smart Cities mission for implementation, a large number of them are focusing on mobility. And that encourages us as well as the cities to look at sustainable mobility actively as part of this program. This slide we wanted to share to tell you the current status of Smart Cities project in India, with a lot of time that was taken to mobilize action on ground. Today, we see that around half of the projects that were supposed to be implemented as part of the Smart City mission have already started on ground. And so we are at a good stage to talk about things that are being done and can be done as part of the project selected as well. Our association, Italy South Asia's association in this mission, has been through a project wherein we worked with Sandeep Gandhi Architects, supported by Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation, in 4 cities primarily: Ludhiana, Gwalior, Udaipur, and Visakhapatnam, focusing on providing hand-holding support to cities focused on energy efficiency in buildings and urban mobility. In the past, we've also worked in Jaipur and Kakinada cities. So going further, I wanted to share a bit about IPT and e-rickshaws. Our focus of work has been primarily on electrification of IPT, and so that's mostly e-rickshaws, deployment of e-rickshaws in an organized and planned manner in the smart cities. We know that India has one of the highest percentages of public transport use in the world. IPT sector, which is dominated primarily by 3-wheelers, makes up for around 11% of mode share in most of our cities. We know that auto rickshaws and e-rickshaws currently provide alternate mobility as first and last mile solutions. And e-rickshaws being electric could help solve the issue of growing emissions through mobility sector in our cities. This is a slide telling you a little bit about what IPT means. and how it is characterized in our cities in India. Another slide telling you from the most recent data from MRTH about the share that we have of IPT in our cities. So a lot of yellow and blue that you see is all IPT. And this is what helps us move in our cities in India. As part of the work that we did a small bit of assessment of existing operations in cities, and we found that three-seater auto services operate on contract carriage permits. We have bigger auto rickshaws which operate from point to point or on contract permits. There are tempos also operating shared transport fixed route services, and also these three-wheelers operate as load carrying vehicles ferrying goods across the cities. So we come to the three cities that we have done our work in, and in terms of mode share, you will see that in Udaipur and Gwalior, we have around 11% of the trips and around 26% of the trips in Kakinada that are served by three-wheelers. We've noticed that most of the three-wheelers are diesel-based and around 10 years old, have substantial contribution to air quality, air pollution in the cities. As part of the smart city activities, these cities envisaged improving IPD, reduce pollution, improve traffic circulation, and reduce congestion. And so our work in these cities have been to implement e-rickshaw projects in consultation with the municipal corporation, the smart city SPV, as well as related authorities across the city, be it the traffic police, the RTA, or existing auto operators who are currently in the business of IPT. What we noticed in the cities while understanding the issues that are related to IPT in the cities was that there are certain issues related to infrastructure such as parking places, pickup or drop areas. There are older vehicles that require maintenance. There is the lack of organized finance if we were to look at making the electrifying the sector in future. There are no auto stands that are located, and there's very little monitoring that's happening of the operations in the cities as well. There are other issues related to illegality and behavioral issues, safety and such that are also pointed out. So based that, the assistance that we have provided to the cities on this thematic area has included an assessment of existing operations, including analysis of routes, a strategy to make IPT more efficient, develop an operational and business model for the future, provide policy support for IPT, use of alternate technology to make IPT sector less polluting, so electrification primarily, and then going further, conducting trials or pilots to understand how viable this is if this was to go further on a larger scale in the cities. Slides about e-rickshaws as IPT. So primarily, the understanding of e-rickshaws is electricity-powered three-wheelers, which have been visible on Indian roads since 2008. There's a technical definition as well. And there are few very well-known manufacturers who are developing these e-rickshaws for the Indian market. There are many others, and it's a long list. So we've only listed some of the Indian well-known manufacturers as an illustration. Some of the positives that we know about e-rickshaws, and we discuss a lot on these when we talk to cities on electrification of IPT, is that they cause no local pollution. There's no noise that comes out of these vehicles. There is limited maintenance requirement. There's limited fuel costs associated with e-rickshaws. They are a good employment source uh, for operators and an option that is green. And definitely, they serve the last and the first mile needs of commuters. Some challenges that are some challenges that are also part of electrification of e-rickshaws in the city include at the policy level the fact that they are guided by the Motor Vehicles Amendment Act, which defines it in certain terms only. There's very limited understanding of what kind of policy guidelines need to be issued uh, at the city level to guide the e-rickshaws operations within the city. Technically, the challenges are the fact that they have a limited range, which means that they would be only able to operate a certain distance, and means that only 2 to 4 kilometers last mile connections may be the most feasible ones that they serve. There's a limited battery life when we talk about lead acid batteries, which are primarily batteries that are being used by e-rickshaws currently. It changes if we look at lithium ion, but there are cost issues that are also included when we are looking at lithium ion. This is definitely a new technology, and so new users need to learn how to operate these vehicles. In terms of infrastructure, we need charging points, we need parking and halting locations, service stations are required. And a very important one is the fact that there are very limited financing options that are available for individuals who want to go ahead and procure e-rickshaws for operation. When we talk to cities about deploying e-rickshaws in the cities, there are four models that we talk about. One could be that the city buys and operates them on their own. So, in a way, a kind of a public transport system add-on to the city. Another model is that the city provides subsidy and facilitates guaranteed loans for individual purchase and then guides their operation within the city. The third is that the city only provides infrastructure and legal support, including charging stations, parking stations, and insurance policy, and similar, and hopes that the individuals go ahead and procure them. And a last option can be that the city invites PPP investor to procure and operate them under exclusive terms. This model, though most liked by cities, requires a long-term agreement and needs the project to be financially attractive as well. In terms of operations, also, there are two models that a city can look at, specifying routes, fares, and priority areas where then these e-rickshaws could operate, or allow for pan-city operations, but allow for the market to decide preferred routes. And of course, one can do a mix and match of these different models to go ahead and see implementation within their own localities. Just a minute, yeah. The specifications to know when we are talking about e-rickshaws are that we need to look at safety certification, we need to look at the kind of power that would be required, and the power that the e-rickshaw units have to operate within different kinds of geographies, including terrain, speed limits that they are required to adhere to, the gradability of individual products, the range that they can operate at, their carrying capacity. Uh, this is a key concern a lot of times because 4 passengers plus a driver and a limited amount of luggage can be allowed. Beyond that, if you load the vehicle, the performance of the vehicle is affected. Battery and its capacity and the overall efficiency of the battery. At the city level, some of the legal issues that need to be addressed, of course, are to understand the licensing procedure, registration process, the guidelines for operations, fares that need to be fixed or not, routes for operations, vehicle specifications, the fitness of vehicles that's required to be checked, and regular training of uh, drivers. There's another very important thing that one needs to consider while thinking of e-rickshaws deployment in the cities, which includes how they overlap with existing IPT systems in the city. And so when we talk to cities about deployment of e-rickshaws, what we tell them is decide the most feasible and preferred approach or model that you want to go ahead with. Look at developing a policy guideline which includes routes that you want them to run on, fares that people would charge when they are running e-rickshaws, setting up an institutional framework in terms of who governs what actions, specify measures to address future changes in technology, look at performance monitoring systems that are put in place, training and education requirements of drivers as well as people who are regulating, develop an action plan, a graded action plan that allows you to think about how you want to see this going further and uh, support implementation accordingly, discuss with key stakeholders, which should include current IPT operators as well in the city, and develop the required institutional setup, and then go ahead and finalize your action plan for implementation. So using that kind of an approach, the kind of work that we have done across a number of cities we would like to share. There's modernization of IPT in Udaipur that has been supported. The e-rickshaws were procured. So what we did was we helped the that was keen on deploying e-rickshaws as IPT, part of the smart city work that they wanted to do. We facilitated procurement of e-rickshaws through another project called Capacities in the city. 18 e-rickshaws of different makes, different battery types, passenger as well as loader e-rickshaws, and we've helped them operate the e-rickshaws on specific routes and develop an understanding of if the city wanted to operate e-rickshaws or guide operation of e-rickshaws, what are the kind of things they need to think about in terms of their own preparedness and readiness and what it will involve from that side. Some pictures that show you how this work was carried out, interactions, setting up street corridors with traffic police, with the city administration, having the e-rickshaws available for operations. We worked in a specific corridor within the full city area, which eventually the city wanted to make not accessible for regular motorized traffic. And so we used our existing e-rickshaws that we procured through another project to provide a service to the citizens and visitors at minimum charges, operating within one plus two smaller corridors in the old city area. This map shows you where in the city of Udaipur these corridors were existing. I think the major area was from Jagdish Chowk to PWD parking, linked to a parking area where motor vehicles could come and park and then use these e-rickshaws to enter into the old city area. A corridor outside of the old city was also tested to understand how is it that they would perform if a longer stretch was provided for them for operations. This is part of a larger plan that the city is working on, looking at pedestrianization of the old city area, restricting vehicular traffic because people live there. It's not possible to completely disallow motor vehicles, but restricting their entrance timings, and during those timings, allowing other modes which act as IPT access to let tourists or residents enter into the old city area. In terms of scale up, the city is planning to look at newer products such as e-autos together with e-rickshaws for future modernization of the existing IPT sector within the city. To facilitate that, also a plan of providing a number of charging locations across the city is being discussed currently. These are the corridors within the city where we did our pilot and trial. Another similar activity that was carried out was a trial that um, a pilot implementation that we facilitated in Gwalior. Gwalior is one of the other cities that we are working in, and the city, as part of the ABD area, has plans to revitalize the Maharajpara area, which is central business district within the city. And this being the heritage core, the plan is to ring fence the entire area, not allow motor vehicles inside this particular space, and serve the commuting needs of citizens as well as tourists through e-rickshaws, also complemented with e-loaders, because there are some business areas which have requirements for freight movement within this area. So we worked primarily with the Gwalior Smart City SPV, and together with the PMC and the municipal corporation have conceptualized and helped develop this as a project. The Smart City SPV will act as a facilitator for the large purchase order, where 150 beneficiaries will be connected to the supplier through a single purchase agreement. And loans would be facilitated through a number of banks that are also guaranteed by the SPV and the municipal corporation for repayment over time. This map shows you how a route plan was decided. So what you see in blue is all area within the Maharajpara area. So there are 7 corridors that we've suggested for the city to operate, and which are restricted for other traffic, but e-rickshaws operate there. 2 corridors that are outside of the Maharajpara area are also suggested and implemented, which include access from the bus station as well as the railway station. So if there are visitors who are coming to the Maharajpara area, they have a direct access through this low carbon IPT option. You can see there are 5 routes within Maharajpara area. We've agreed on minimum tariffs on sharing basis, but others to be market oriented. Financing is supported through the National Urban Livelihoods Mission and also through banks that have come on board. A subsidy is provided for individual operators who come within this scheme. And also there's a branding and marketing option that the SPV is planning for. This is the work that has been done in Gwalior. Current status due to the election is that the tender has been opened and the bidder has been finalized. There are final touches, including the beneficiaries being connected to the e-rickshaws that will be operated in this city. This is what is currently happening. And we also wanted to share some work that was done in the past in the city of Kakinada. Here we held, this was the first engagement we had where we looked at e-rickshaws as an option and requirement of the city to operate e-rickshaws within city limits. During this engagement, we help city understand the approach that they should follow based on what we shared earlier, and finalized a business model and a subsidy scheme that they could use, plugging into the existing national and state schemes, employment schemes that allow for some funding to be reserved. Also, as part of this initiative, we then introduced a number of e-rickshaw manufacturers to the city, and trials were conducted across the city for the city officials to understand, make them understand what are the technical grounds that they need to focus on if e-rickshaws is something that they want to go further with. As next steps, as at that time, Kakinada wanted to procure 100 e-rickshaws and operate them across. So this is just a map that shows you how the organization structure for the entire city was developed if e-rickshaws were to be deployed within the city. Various stakeholders to be part of this plan, and funding to be supported through banks, as well as subsidy to come through state departments for procurement of e-rickshaws. So in terms of way ahead, if based on this experience, we were to talk about things that we need to focus on, are that if you're looking at technology, retrofitting against new purchases, majority of the vehicles that are existing currently in the market are more than 8 years old. So that's something to be thought of if you're talking about retrofitting. Technologies for retrofits that are existing are inferior to e-autos, and so that's probably not what we want to look at. We want to look at e-rickshaws and e-autos that are probably new in this. Financing is another thing that we want to look at. How can we finance e-autos when diesel or CNG autos cannot get financed already? The kind of interest rates that are prevalent in the market for diesel and CNG autos are really high. So that's a concern. And that causes also becomes the reason for defaults on EMIs. So this is something that needs to be focused on. At the policy level, I think one needs to recognize IPT as a formal mode of transport, as a mode of transport that exists in the city and caters to a very large need that we have in our cities. And through the city, through existing administration at municipal level, we can look at facilitating bulk tenders and financing models that allow for electrification. Also, going further, if one is to look at e-autos and e-rickshaws within the IPT fleets in the city, probably there's need to prioritize these permits over the traditional. So that's all from our side in terms of our experience implementing the projects within the smart city frame. If there are any questions, we would be taking them up in the subsequent round. But for now, we wanted to invite our two panelists and ask them some. Of course, to begin with, would be great to get a reaction from them on what they heard from us, and we would like to then ask them some specific questions, and be great to get their feedback on. I would invite Professor Sanjay Gupta to react first. You're not audible, sir. You are now. You can talk. You can talk.
Yeah, and probably highlight the growing importance of IPT system, for urban mobility. In fact, I often say that well, IPT is a neglected option uh, all along, in spite of giving a very important role, particularly in medium and small cities. We often find that they are just left to fend for themselves, and very little effort actually is done. But I think with over time now we have started finding that some of the growing issues of mobility needs, which particularly probably are best answered by so-called micromodes, such as paratransit or IPT systems, make them now a very important player in the urban mobility ecosystem. Now, just to kind of take it forward, I mean, obviously the study has had an attempt of piloting auto rickshaws experiments and even working out that there is a good business model which one can probably take it forward. Obviously, the issue will be obviously how to leapfrog it into something which is more scalable at the city level. But just to also keep in mind also that there is already an auto rickshaw segment which is prevailing and which is answering the mobility in cities, and obviously we obviously is the answer from medium to long term as a societal objective. Let's put it for a clean energy and clean environment. But I think just to recapitulate what is really happening, a very interesting study was done a couple of years back with the Institute of Urban Transport on auto rickshaws in the country, and I just want to kind of look into the kind of just quick figures which come out in terms of what is the passenger ridership per unit of vehicle. They carry almost 50 passengers on average. 18 study which was done, almost 50% of the people are actually going and using these systems for work purpose, so which also tells us that it becomes a very obligatory mode of travel for essential trips like work. They're almost doing a vehicle utilization levels of 100 kilometers per day. I think what the important point of these indicators are also pointers to the fact that when you are having a similar kind of a system but with a cleaner technology, well, we would probably need to kind of look at these figures also in terms of a viable business model. Obviously, there are two models of operation, one with rental and one without rental systems. Both of them have their own profitability. So that again would be a point, because that again will get into your business model as to how many people would be able to own it, or how many people would want to rather take it on rent and probably pay a daily rental or a monthly rental. So this again probably is an add-on point when we're talking about business model. What would be the thing? And average rent was about 250 per day. So that tells you that people were willing to pay 250 rupees per day auto rickshaws. So I think that again would get added into if tomorrow we were to upscale e-rickshaws. Well, this is the benchmark, or this is the minimum we need to kind of take it. And then accordingly you need to kind of bring how to finance, what component of it has to be subsidized to have this minimum kind of a role for e-auto rickshaws. Uh, 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 we also, I think, very interestingly, I mean, let's look at into some of the issues which probably typically finance models for IPT, if one were to take it. Obviously, you have the traditional, financing mechanisms which start from a government self-employment scheme to nationalized bank financing. which is there. Microfinancing is there through nationalized banks, which are more bank funded. Okay, where you probably have interest rates that are lower. There is a flexibility of returns which you can do it over 5 to 10 years, depending on how much you're earning per day. And then you have the models wherein you have the private companies formed. You have companies, for example, the very interesting experiment being done by 3W United India Services Limited in Bangalore, where they're trying to kind of bring around 90% of the cost of vehicles they are pitching in, and 10% has to be pitched in by the operator, and he can actually give a daily return rental, return on the loan for over a 5-year period. So this probably has a partnership which is lying between the local banking partners and private corporate sectors like ING financing and Airtel and stuff. So I think this, but the point of debate would be that how much you can upscale. Initially, they're trying to kind of bring in 500 auto rickshaws under it, but the point is, one were to upscale it to a still larger, would we have such models replicated in different cities to bring it? And then you obviously have corporate financing, which probably has this issue of whether it would be really for the society interest or the personal interest, as the case. You have classical. And there also has been a model which is probably called an SPV approach, wherein we all know that you run the system either on the gross cost or the net cost, and concessionaire. So maybe an issue of probe, and this would be very interesting to look at. Is there a case for an SPV coming in, and the private concessionaire could be an e-vehicle manufacturer himself. He could be an e-vehicle manufacturer himself who act like a private concessionaire, who comes into the market and probably, I think an evaluation will have to be done whether gross cost or net cost will work. Probably net cost may be much better because there the operator has a revenue control over him, whereas in gross the revenue actually goes to the SPV, and the operator only gets some kilometers, which works very nicely with the bus transport. For the paratransit IPT, I think this again will be an issue. So my point of extension of these studies would be to look into and start looking into the business models of how I think next stage of the research actually from here should be to what would be the ideal business models to upscale such kind of systems. Uh, Keeping in view the limitations of the standard systems, which are very lengthy, tedious, and people are not very willing. They might be very interesting for cycle rickshaw operators, but for rickshaw operators, and when I'm talking about auto rickshaws per se, I think then we need to have something which is slightly more organized, and where the risk probably is lesser, and there is no problem of a loan, forthcoming for operations. Uh,
I think if I could ask Vivek to also react to the presentation.
Thanks, Ashish. So I think the presentation was quite comprehensive on your. So, yeah, presentation was quite kind of true. Sorry. Hello. Is this better? Okay. Yeah. So thanks again, Ashish. And the presentation has been quite comprehensive. That's what I was hinting at. And that having seen the project through and most of the questions and decisions that had to be taken, it hasn't been quite simple or straightforward. I think that's something that we have to all acknowledge. And there are several different conditions that exist within cities, and the way they approach to an extent IPT which is what makes it interesting. I would want to just kind of draw the contrast that several cities in the Gangetic Plain, to an extent, have electric rickshaws, with nobody having gotten involved in its deployment at all, right? And they're plentiful to an extent. However, you see, to an extent, cities in Rajasthan taking a very, let's say, measured approach towards it, or that would be the case. And several cities in the south don't have these at all. None of these options even exist at this point. So that gives us an idea that okay, there are different approaches to this. Cities have various ways of approaching. How do we then? The question might be on how. Hello. So the question might be there in this question is how do we continue to engage with cities and look at the various perspectives, right? So that is an important issue, and then that is an important issue, and that kind of leads you to the legal angle of it, of IPT itself, and how they function in cities, and the context in which they are allowed to work, sometimes or disallowed from working. So that's one. Second issue is of electrification, and I think this is something that we see. This is a great opportunity that we had because IPT to an extent is providing, let's say, the mainstay public transport function in most of our cities. It's only the top 20 cities in our country to an extent, or 20, maybe a little bit more than that, that have any kind of formal public transport service. So this is the, and we're looking at electrifying that mode. Is to an extent doing a lot more for our clean air in our cities than some other actions could. So that's one factor working towards electrification of transport, and to an extent IPT. The second aspect of it with electric vehicles, I think, is that the cost. It has been, at least with e-rickshaws, the cost has been at a point where it could be picked up very quickly and even without much finance worked out. When we look at just the next segment, which is electric autos, we immediately see there's a financing problem, right? And there's a huge gap there. So again, there is a duality there. One segment seems to be working quite easily, but the other not. While also then we could argue that maybe electric rickshaws are not suitable for many cities, while autos they still don't have a problem with. So again, how does that balance work is something we will have to continue to dwell on. And of course, I think lastly, I would like to say that it's interesting to see that smart cities have engaged on this quite strongly, and that so I think we've lost our view. Yeah. So the point that smart cities have engaged quite actively on these in several of our cities, and that I think it makes sense to continue to engage because there is potential still. I think many cities who have electric rickshaws deployment and electric rickshaws in their cities under deployment have not looked at it as an opportunity to maybe clean up their central business districts. To provide extensive public transport connectivity solutions. These actions are just beginning to be taken. Last mile connectivity, as we know, has been an issue in most cities. Electric rickshaws are a great opportunity to look at that neighborhood level connectivity solution. Now, can we see more of these being to an extent encouraged and supported, at least, if not being planned out? I don't think we really need to go into that situation where we have to figure out the routes to a large extent. Can we at least, can cities at least, to an extent, allow for them to function in certain areas? If they have congestion-related concerns, and this is something that maybe we didn't really raise, a lot of cities are now saying this is congestion, this is going to cause congestion, because rickshaws do move slowly. There is, to an extent, a safety side to it that's actually better for our cities, that to an extent traffic speeds are not very high. But there is a balance that we need to take. Is it the arterial road that is getting clogged? Then maybe we need to find that balance. That the neighborhoods are the ones where the electric rickshaws function. So there is again great opportunity there. Has it been tapped fully? Not at all. Actually, I think there's a lot of work that can happen there with our cities. And I think so. That's probably where we could see this going forward. This experiment, to an extent, this work that you have done with smart cities has shown that there is scope. There is scope to take this further as well. So I think how we take it forward would be quite interesting to see.
So thank you, Vivek. Thank you, Professor Sandra. I have one more follow-up question, but I think I would want to just make sure that we are able to take up the questions that were raised during the presentation, provide a response to that, and then probably go back into our discussion. One of the questions asks if the idea of introducing e-rickshaws is really good and effective in terms of environmental aspects, but what is the alternative plan for existing stock of fuel-based rickshaws in the city? Now, an interesting question. In the project, I can tell you that we were focused on implementing the project that the city was interested in, but in terms of going further, the suggestion was to look at the new arriving e-rickshaws, the new arriving auto rickshaws for registration should be, like I mentioned in probably the last slide, should be given priority if they are electric. And so in a way, we are allowing the new IPT three-wheeler that's entering into the market to be electric. However, if you have any additional suggestions, that would be great. Vivek.
So, with the existing stock, I think again we have to look at it in two different ways. Yes, there is a lot of scope that the new auto rickshaws and rickshaws are all electric. That's one. The other is to look at the other end of the spectrum, which is auto rickshaws. To look at two-stroke auto rickshaws. There in several of our cities. Can we match a replacement strategy? Can we scrap some of those two-stroke auto rickshaws, which are highly polluting, and replace them with electric rickshaws instead? So the license continues to remain the same to operate electric auto rickshaws, but then we replace them with a wheelie. To an extent, this was the experiment which was done in Bangalore, which TWU to an extent got involved in. I think that's one way again to not having to create another segment for auto rickshaws and new set of licenses, but using the same set and going after the laggards, in a sense, the ones that are more polluting, and convert them. So that's another way of looking at it.
I think I agree with both of your observation. I think that's the right way to go about it. Only thing probably it would be interesting to find where these two-stroke auto rickshaws are predominantly operating. If it is operating in cities which are smaller, I just because I don't know the number right now, then I think e-auto rickshaws affordability in the business model, because you don't get the kind of reuse, vehicle utilization. So probably a business model will have to be worked out to replace them. I think that would be one point. The other point which I just wanted to mention is that when we talk about the paratransit, probably it has three roles of operation. One role is the called basic role, which probably is, as rightly said by Vijay, is largely the central areas, core areas, and small cities, small and medium cities. I think this to me this to me also would become very important, because if I were to see that what would be the penetration of the auto rickshaws, which are the physical areas where they would be first looked upon. So if you're talking about small or medium-sized cities, probably the core areas, okay, or in fact for them it becomes a basic mode of transport. But if you go to bigger cities, let's put it, say cities like Delhi, which is a mega city, or even cities like Surat, and getting into 3 million, 4 million, 5 million, probably it will have differential roles. So in the core areas, it will become the basic, whereas in the non-core areas, depending upon your transit supply, it might either become a complementary mode or a supplementary mode. So if you have a metro running, then it would be advisable to have them as a complement to metro. So I think that also becomes a very interesting way of trying to size up the operational area. And then actually you know how much of vehicle utilization you can work out depending upon the lead of feeding those services. And then it gives you a way forward to work out your business models. And maybe who knows, tomorrow the metro could co-own these systems. So it might be a good way of actually financing their operations. When you talk about the concessionaire, in this case, it could be the metro rail operation themselves. So that is another way of actually leapfrogging and taking things forward. I think one point or another, one should take a city where it becomes a success story. I think that's very important. So if you have a success story coming in, then it helps you in replicating another city. So I think that's another issue. Maybe one can say that which cities are ripe for making an entry, so that it becomes a success story, and then you can start replicating.
Sure. Great. Thank you, Professor Sanjay, Vivek. Great responses. I'll take up another question, and this is just a short response to it. One of the participants asks if during our work in this area we've considered the parking impacts of IPT modes. We have in all of the areas, they are central district areas, and the access into these areas was considered, and like I showed in the work in Udaipur, the trial route was starting from a parking location. Similar in case of Gwalior, we've thought of where people would alight and then use these extras. And charging was another thing that was thought of, because that is also the reason why we've linked them to the parking locations, because this was one facility that was needed for the e-rickshaws to be operating, and large parking plots on the peripheries of central areas allow us to provide charging opportunity. So thanks, and there's another question that we have on from one of the participants asking, the comment on business model was quite useful. Have we covered integration between IPT and PT modes on the lines of mass? Yes, this is something that is being discussed. If any of you would like to share your thoughts on it, would be great, and I could add something more.
I think I would just like to add a small thing that since if you were to have an ideal integration, say between the, I'm not taking these case cities per se, but larger issues where transit is there, metro is there. I think first thing we need to do is vacate the parking at metro station by private cars. And I think that is where we should give priority to the IPT. So if you start giving priority to parking to IPT, or you have integration, because as soon as you come out of the metro, there is an IPT waiting for you to just drop you, and depending on the drop mile, it again comes back and parks. So I think this is one thing which probably answers both the parking and the integration issue, that we should have a parking policy not for cars at the station, but for paratransit, which will encourage the LMC and which will also facilitate and remove all the congestion which we often find around the bus stops or the terminals. I think this is another thing. The second point of charging, I was just wondering that probably if the charging technology comes such that on one charge I can operate the view which I am supposed to do. Okay, if I am able to operate about 100 kilometers in one charge, then I think your charging requirements also, in that sense, you are more flexible of where you're going to charge in the night. Okay, so we need to kind of also look into technology, whether in small cities I don't have to do multiple charging. It will depend upon my operations, my demand. So I think those requirements, everything has to do with how much I'm operating. If I'm not operating, I don't have to charge multiple times. The range is good enough for me to operate on a single charge.
Sure. Thank you, Professor. We have another question where the participant is asking what could be the private sector investment options in this sector. Yeah, I could speak.
Yeah.
So one of
Please.
what we have seen is, of course, some of the banking institutions are interested, but usually when the private sector is coming in to invest in this sector, it is for uh, a service that they are then providing. A service like the Smarty that operates in Delhi NCR has a good amount of investment coming in from the private sector, which allows them to procure large amount of e-rickshaws, which they then operate. And this is not the traditional IPT way of operating, but this is like having a fleet which is managed by one particular company that then operates them on their own business plan. So that's one of the ways that the private sector has we've seen come in this particular year.
Yeah, I think it would be something of a shuttle concept, what you have in Gurgaon and other places, and I'm told it's doing quite well. During last 4 years, it's quite picked up, and it's got operations all over the country now. So, as you rightly said, it is a fleet. So the company will have to maintain a fleet and probably do services of pick and drop, maybe office trips. And again, I think that is where the charging will become important, because you cannot stop a vehicle for charging in route. So it has to be charged up to the top and pick up and drop. I think these are interesting opportunities for exploring further. I think.
Great, thank you. Just one last question. I think we are short of time. We are actually overshooting time right now. The question is specific to the implementing team. On what basis the new routes were selected for Udaipur city, and is it going to be an integrated approach, and how the new mobility patterns are going to affect the urban green spaces? I don't understand quite much the later part of the question, but I can tell you that the routes were decided on the basis of the larger plan that the city had for having the core part of the city become low carbon and have less of motorized traffic entering and causing congestion in the narrow streets within the old city. And what we did was part of that plan, and was done as a trial, a pilot, to show the city how, if this was the intention, the initial steps could be taken for future large-scale implementation of a plan for the entire APD area, which is the old city area. So I think for now we've come to the end of this session. We would like to thank you all for attending it and raising questions. It's been interesting discussing, but I think it's a lot more that we would like to discuss and continue discussing. For now, we'll be closing this session. I want to inform you that tomorrow, around the same time, we will be having a discussion on the work that we have done for developing NMT, improving NMT access within some of the smart cities. Streets for all primarily, and this is a very interesting discussion that we will be having tomorrow. Day after, we focus on energy conservation building codes and their implementation in Indian cities. So thank you all experts for joining us, and participants for being such active participants. Thank you.